I took the job because my sister needed surgery and insurance wouldn't cover the experimental part. The ranger station posting promised $800 a week, cash, for overnight wildlife monitoring in the Cascade foothills. No degree required, no references checked, just a clean driving record and the ability to follow instructions. The supervisor met me at the trailhead parking lot on a Tuesday in late September. His truck was older than mine, Forest Service green with a dented bumper. He didn't shake my hand. "You drove the whole way up?" he asked. "4 hours from Eugene." He nodded and handed me a ring with 12 keys, each tagged with faded tape. Cabin's 3.2 miles in. The trail's marked, but you'll want to memorize landmarks by the second week. There's no cell service past mile 1. I saw that in the listing. Radio only. Channel 6. I'm on from 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. your first month, then we go to check-ins only. He pulled a laminated card from his jacket. Frequencies and codes. Memorize these. Don't write them down anywhere else. The card listed 4 channels and 12 three-digit codes. I studied it for 30 seconds. "There's a propane generator," he continued. "Enough fuel for the lights and the fridge. The well pump runs on a separate battery system. You'll check the charge every night at 10 p.m. exactly." "Exactly? Everything's on a schedule. You'll see." He walked to the bed of his truck and lowered the tailgate. 3 boxes of supplies sat in neat rows. Dry goods, batteries, first aid. There's a pantry inventory sheet in the cabin. You'll update it every Sunday before dawn. I loaded the boxes into my backpack and a borrowed frame pack, the weight pressed against my shoulders. "Weather turns fast up here," the supervisor said. "You'll seal the south window every night between 2:10 a.m. and 2:20 a.m. After 2:20 a.m., you leave it uncovered." "Why the specific time?" He looked at me with flat eyes. "Because those are the rules. You follow them or you leave. There's no third option." I adjusted the pack straps. "Understood. The cabin's been empty for 6 weeks. Prior occupant left some notes. Read them tonight." He climbed back into his truck. "I'll radio at 1800 hours. Answer with code 417 and your name. Not a nickname. Your legal first name." "All right." "And don't go past the tree line on the north side. Not for any reason." He drove off before I could ask what counted as the tree line. The trail climbed through Douglas fir and hemlock. The undergrowth was thick with ferns and Oregon grape. I counted my steps out of habit, losing track around 4,000. The first landmark was a lightning-split cedar. The second, a creek crossing with a rusted cable handhold. At 2.8 miles, I passed a cairn of stacked stones, each one roughly the size of a bread loaf. The cabin sat in a clearing ringed by old-growth fir. It was smaller than I expected, maybe 20 feet by 15, with a covered porch and a green metal roof. The windows were narrow, 2 on the south wall and 1 each on the east and west. The north wall had no windows at all. I used the 3rd key on the ring to open the padlock. The door swung inward on oiled hinges. The interior was colder than the outside air. A wood stove sat in the northwest corner, a narrow cot against the east wall, a table and 2 chairs in the center. Shelves lined the south wall, stocked with canned goods and plastic water jugs. A radio transceiver occupied the western shelf, its antenna wire running up through a ceiling grommet. Someone had written CH6 only on the shelf in marker. I set down the packs and walked the perimeter. The floorboards were solid. The door had 2 deadbolts and a slide bar. Each window had interior shutters held closed by hook latches. A clipboard hung on a nail by the stove. The top sheet was titled Ranger Station 7, Operational Guidelines. Below that, a numbered list in small, careful handwriting. I sat at the table and read. 1. Arrive before 1600 hours on your first day. Inventory all supplies against the checklist on page 2. Report discrepancies via radio on channel 6 using code 229. 2. The generator starts with the red switch only. Do not use the black switch under any circumstance. 3. Check the well pump battery at 2200 hours every night. Voltage must read between 12.4 and 13.2. If it falls below 12, radio immediately with code 551. 4. At 2130 hours, walk the perimeter of the cabin. Count your steps. The number should be between 106 and 110. If the count is outside this range, return inside and lock all doors. Do not attempt a second perimeter walk until dawn. 5. Between 2210 hours and 2220 hours, cover the south window with the canvas shade. Use all 6 hooks. After 2220 hours, remove the shade completely and do not cover the window again until the next night. 6. If you hear knocking at the door, count the knocks. Answer only if the count is 3, and only if the voice that follows gives the correct code phrase. This month's phrase is supply drop confirmed. Do not answer knocking that comes in groups of 2 or 4. 7. Between 2300 and 0400 hours, do not look directly at the north tree line. If you must move outside during these hours, keep your eyes on the ground or the cabin. 8. The footpath to the latrine is exactly 42 paces from the cabin door. Count every trip. If the count changes by more than 2 paces in either direction, return to the cabin immediately and use the emergency bucket inside. 9. You may hear your name called from the woods. Do not answer unless the voice identifies itself with roll and code. This is dispatch. Code 385 is correct. This is Tom. Code 385 is not, even if Tom is someone you know. 10. If you see another person in or near the cabin between 2200 and 0500 hours, ask them to state their business and their supervisor's name. If they cannot provide both, move to the opposite side of the cabin and avoid interaction. Do not make eye contact. 11. The stove requires wood from the covered pile on the east side of the cabin only. Do not burn wood from any other source, including fallen branches or the uncovered pile on the west side. 12. Maintain a log of all events, anomalies, and weather changes. Use the bound notebook in the top desk drawer. Write the date and time for every entry. All times must be written in 2400-hour format. 13. If the radio loses signal on channel 6, switch to channel 9 and wait. Do not broadcast on other channels unless using an emergency code. 14. Your shift ends at 0600 hours every morning. Complete the overnight checklist before sleeping. Sleep only during daylight hours. I read the list 3 times. Some of the rules made practical sense. Others felt arbitrary, the kind of thing someone added after something went wrong. The notebook mentioned in Rule 12 sat in the drawer, a black hardcover with the elastic strap. I opened it to the first page. June 18. Arrived 1430 hours. Inventory complete, no discrepancies. Generator starts clean. Well pump at 12.8 volts. Perimeter count 108 steps. First night quiet except for elk bugling around midnight. The handwriting matched the operational guidelines. The entries continued in short, factual paragraphs. The prior ranger, I assumed it was one person, though the notebook didn't give a name, had logged weather, animal sightings, supply usage, and radio checks. Most nights were described as quiet or uneventful. I flip forward to the last entries. August 22, perimeter count 112, returned inside per rule 4, no second attempt, night quiet. August 23, perimeter count 109, routine, heard name called at 0115 hours, no roll or code given, did not answer, voice stopped after 11 minutes. August 24, perimeter count 107, generator acting sluggish on startup but ran fine. Knocking at door, 2 knocks, 0230 hours, did not answer, Knocking stopped. August 25. Perimeter count 113. Stayed inside. Someone visible at North Tree Line at 0300 hours, standing still, no details visible. Followed Rule 7, did not look directly. Figure gone by 0345 hours. August 26. This is my last entry. New ranger starts in 6 weeks. I've left the operational guidelines updated. Follow them exactly. The count matters. The times matter. Don't convince yourself you know better. That was the final entry. 6 weeks ago, according to the date. I checked my watch. 15:43 hours. I had 17 minutes before the inventory deadline. The checklist on page 2 was extensive. Canned vegetables, 12 units. Canned protein, 18 units. Rice, 5 pounds. Dried beans, 3 pounds. Coffee, 1 pound. The list continued for 2 pages. I counted every item, checking boxes as I went. 3 cans of tuna were missing, but the rest matched. At 1600 hours exactly, I powered on the radio. It hissed with static until I turned the dial to channel 6. Station 7 to base, code 229. 3 cans of tuna short on inventory. Over. The reply came 30 seconds later. Base to Station 7. Copy that. Noted for next supply run. Confirmed generator operational. Over. I walked to the generator in the back corner. A red switch and a black switch side by side. I flipped the red switch. The generator coughed once and settled into a steady rhythm. The overhead light flickered on. Station 7 to base, generator operational. Over. Copy. First check-in at 1800 hours. Use code 417 and your legal first name. Over and out. The radio went silent. I spent the next hour splitting wood from the covered pile. The pieces were dry, already cut to stove length. I stacked them inside near the door, enough for 3 days. The covered pile on the east side had maybe 2 weeks of supply left. The uncovered pile on the west side had even more, the logs dark with rain exposure. I didn't touch the west pile. At 1730 hours, I ate a cold meal from my own supplies. At 1800 hours, the radio crackled. Base to Station 7, check-in, over. Station 7 to base, code 417, Daniel, over. Copy, Daniel. Settling in all right? Over. Yes. Inventory complete. Generator running. Over. Good. You read the guidelines? Over. I did. Follow them. I'm on Channel 6 all night if you need anything. Over and out. I logged the exchange in the notebook. The light outside faded from gray to dark blue. At 2130 hours, I pulled on my jacket and stepped onto the porch. The air smelled like wet bark and cold stone. I clicked on my flashlight and started walking clockwise around the cabin, counting each step. The ground was uneven but not difficult. I counted carefully. 108 steps brought me back to the porch. I went inside and locked both deadbolts. At 2200 hours, I checked the well pump battery. The display read 12.6 volts, well within range. I logged it. At 2210 hours, I pulled the canvas shade from its hook by the south window. It was heavy, lined with something that blocked light completely. I stretched it across the window frame and secured all 6 hooks, 2 at the top, 2 at the sides, 2 at the bottom. The fabric pulled tight with no gaps. I sat at the table and watched my watch. The second hand swept around. At 22:20 hours exactly, I stood and removed all 6 hooks. The shade dropped into my hands. I folded it and hung it back on its original hook. The south window showed only darkness and the faint reflection of the cabin interior. I added wood to the stove and made coffee. At 2300 hours, I turned off the overhead light and sat by the stove with just the firelight. I kept my eyes on the notebook, on the table, on my hands. Not on the north wall, not on the window. At 0100 hours, I heard footsteps outside. They circled the cabin slowly, the crunch of boots on pine needles and gravel. I counted the rhythm. The steps were even, deliberate. They passed the east wall, then the south, then the west. They continued past the north wall and returned to the east. One complete circle, then another. I didn't move. I kept my eyes on the stove. The footsteps stopped at the door. Silence for 10 seconds. Then 2 knocks, solid and sharp. I waited. The knocks didn't repeat. After 5 minutes, the footsteps resumed, circling again. They made 3 more loops and then faded toward the forest. I logged it. 100 hours. Footsteps circling cabin, 4 complete loops. 2 knocks at door. Did not answer per rule 6. Steps faded north at 115 hours. The rest of the night was silent. At 600 hours, I completed the overnight checklist, banked the fire, and lay down on the cot. I didn't sleep well, but I slept. I woke at 1300 hours to gray light through the windows. I heated water for instant oatmeal and completed the day log. The supervisor radioed at 1400 hours with a routine check. I gave him code 603 and reported no issues. The second night followed the same pattern. Perimeter walk at 2130 hours, 109 steps. Battery check at 2200 hours, 12.7 volts. Window shade at 2210 hours, removed at 2220 hours. At 0200 hours, I heard knocking again. This time it was 3 knocks. I stood and walked to the door. Yes? A voice came through the wood, flat and uninflected. Supply drop confirmed. I slid back the deadbolts and opened the door 6 inches. A figure stood on the porch, silhouetted against the trees. I couldn't make out a face. Leave it on the porch, I said. Can't do that. Need to verify inventory with you inside. Something in the phrasing felt wrong. I couldn't identify what. What's your supervisor's name? I asked. The figure didn't answer for 3 seconds, then. I don't have that information. I closed the door and locked it. The figure remained on the porch for a full minute, then stepped off and walked away. The footsteps didn't circle this time. They went straight toward the north tree line and stopped. I logged it and added a note. Figure claimed supply drop, but could not provide supervisor name per Rule 10. Sent away. No further contact. I didn't look toward the north tree line for the rest of the night. The pattern repeated for 9 days. Perimeter counts between 106 and 110. Battery voltage between 12.4 and 12.9. Window shade ritual at the same times. Some nights I heard footsteps. Some nights I heard my name called from the woods, always without a roll or code. Twice I heard 3 knocks, but the voice that followed never gave the right code phrase or couldn't answer my questions. On the 10th night, the perimeter count was 112. I stopped walking and counted again in my head, retracing my steps mentally. 112. Outside the acceptable range. I returned to the cabin and locked both deadbolts. I logged the count and added, did not attempt second walk per Rule 4. At 300 hours, I heard something large moving through the undergrowth north of the cabin. It snapped branches and pushed through ferns. The sound grew closer, then stopped perhaps 20 yards from the north wall. I kept my eyes on the table. The sound of breathing reached me, low and steady, like a horse or an elk. It continued for 7 minutes by my watch, then it stopped. The woods went silent. I didn't hear the creature leave. It was simply gone. At 0600 hours, I completed the checklist and tried to sleep. I managed 4 hours. The supervisor radioed at 1400 hours. I gave the code and reported the high perimeter count. Copy that, he said. You followed procedure? Yes, stayed inside, no second attempt. Good, it'll normalize, don't worry about it. What causes the count to change? Static filled the silence. Then, ground shifts, seasonal freeze-thaw. Just stay inside when it's off, over and out. The radio clicked off before I could ask anything else. That night the count was 109, back to normal. I kept following the rules. At the end of the second week, a supply drop arrived. The supervisor hiked in at 1500 hours with a frame pack full of canned goods, batteries, and propane canisters. He verified the inventory with me, checked the generator, and looked at the log. You're doing fine, he said. No issues on your end. The prior ranger left after 6 weeks. Why? Personal reasons. He closed the notebook. You'll get a printed addendum to the guidelines next week. Some clarifications. Clarifications about what? Seasonal adjustments. The days are getting shorter. Some of the timing windows change in late October. He shouldered his empty pack. Keep following the rules. Don't second-guess them. He left before I could press further. The addendum arrived the following week, delivered by a ranger I didn't recognize. She handed me a sealed envelope, verified her identity with code 814 and the supervisor's name, and hiked back out without conversation. I opened the envelope at the table. Station 7 Operational Guidelines, Autumn Addendum, effective October 20th. 15 new rules, numbered from 1 to 15. 1. Beginning October 20th, the south window shade must be placed at 2200 hours and removed at 2230 hours. The 10-minute window remains the same but shifts 30 minutes earlier. 2. Perimeter walks are suspended between October 20th and November 10th. Do not walk the cabin perimeter during this period for any reason. Monitor the exterior via windows only. 3. If you hear scratching on the roof, do not investigate. The sound will stop on its own. Log the time and duration. 4. Between 0100 and 0300 hours, do not use the flashlight outdoors. If you must go outside during these hours, navigate by moonlight or wait for your eyes to adjust. Artificial light attracts attention. 5. The emergency bucket is for use only when the latrine path count changes. Do not use it for convenience. 6. If you observe animal behavior that seems unusual, log the details but do not attempt to explain it. Unusual behaviors include walking backward, circling the cabin more than twice, standing motionless for longer than 5 minutes, or vocalizing in patterns. 7. Voice imitation is common in late autumn. If you hear someone you know, verify identity with roll and code before responding. Do not trust tone, accent, or personal details. 8. The generator may stall between 0200 and 0400 hours. If this happens, wait 15 minutes before attempting a restart. Use the red switch only. If it fails to start after 3 attempts, radio base with code 992. 9. Do not open the door between midnight and 0500 hours unless you have radioed base and received confirmation to do so. This supersedes the supply drop rule. 10. If the radio produces voices you did not call and that do not identify themselves, switch to channel 9 and wait for base to contact you. Do not respond to unidentified voices on any channel. 11. Wood consumption will increase as temperatures drop. Restock from the covered east pile every 3 days. The uncovered west pile remains off limits. 12. If you see lights moving through the forest, note the color, direction, and duration. Do not follow them or attempt to signal. Lights are typically white, yellow, or blue. Red lights should be reported immediately with code 776. 13. The well pump may freeze in early November. If the voltage drops below 12 volts, switch to stored water only and radio base. Do not attempt to repair the pump yourself. 14. Deer are common in this area. If you see a deer facing the cabin without moving for more than 2 minutes, close all shutters and remain inside until it leaves. Do not watch it. 15. These amendments are mandatory. Failure to follow updated procedures will result in immediate reassignment. I read the list twice and felt my chest tighten. The original guidelines had been strict but rational. These new rules felt like someone was correcting errors they'd learned the hard way. I logged the receipt of the addendum and added the page to the clipboard. October 20th arrived cold and clear. I followed the new timing for the south window shade. At 2200 hours, I covered it. At 2230 hours, I removed it. At 0140 hours, I heard scratching on the roof. It started above the stove and moved toward the center of the cabin. The sound was rhythmic, deliberate, like something dragging claws across metal. It continued for 4 minutes. then stopped. I logged it. 0140 hours. Scratching on roof, 4 minutes duration, moved from northwest to center, stopped on its own per addendum rule 3. The scratching returned the next night, and the night after that. Always between 0100 and 0200 hours. Always 4 to 6 minutes. I stopped flinching when it started. On October 24th, I heard my sister's voice calling from the woods. "Danny, are you there? I need help." I froze at the table. My sister was in Eugene, 200 miles away. She'd texted me 3 days ago to say the surgery was scheduled. "Danny, please, I'm lost." The voice was perfect. The cadence, the slight rasp she got when she was tired. Even the nickname she'd used since we were children. I picked up the radio. "Station 7 to base, code 385. Request confirmation. Over." The supervisor's voice came back immediately. "Base to Station 7, go ahead. Over. I'm hearing a voice I recognize. Requesting verification that no one else is in the area. Over." "Confirmed. You are alone in your sector. Do not respond to the voice. Over." "Copy. Over and out." My sister's voice called 3 more times over the next hour, each time from a different direction. The last time, she sounded angry. "Fine, Danny. Stay inside. See if I care." Then silence. I logged it with shaking hands. The next morning, I radioed my sister on my personal phone from the trailhead parking lot, where I'd hiked to get signal. She answered on the second ring. "Hey, how's the cabin?" "It's fine. How are you feeling?" "Nervous about the surgery, but okay. Why?" "Just checking in." We talked for 10 minutes. She sounded normal, healthy. She hadn't called for me. She didn't even know exactly where I was. I hiked back to the cabin and didn't mention the conversation to anyone. On October 27th, the generator stalled at 0215 hours. The lights went out mid-sentence as I wrote in the log. The stove still burned, but the cabin plunged into dimness. I waited 15 minutes by my watch, then walked to the generator and flipped the red switch. Nothing. I tried again. The generator coughed but didn't catch. Third attempt. It started with a shudder and the lights came back on. I logged it and checked the fuel, still half full. The generator stalled again the next night and the night after that. Always between 0200 and 0400 hours. Always starting on the third attempt. On November 1st, I saw the deer. It was standing 30 yards from the south window, facing the cabin directly. A doe, medium-sized, with no visible injuries. It didn't move. I watched it for 90 seconds, then remembered the addendum. I closed all the shutters and sat in the dark by the stove. I didn't look outside for 3 hours. When I finally opened the south shutter at 0400 hours, the deer was gone. On November 5th, the supervisor hiked in with another supply drop and a second addendum. "Emergency protocols," he said, handing me a new sheet. "Memorize these tonight." "Why tonight?" "Weather's turning. We're expecting a significant storm in the next 72 hours. You'll be on your own for at least 5 days, maybe more." He walked me through the new protocols while I inventoried the supplies. Emergency Protocol 1. If snowfall accumulates above 6 inches, suspend all outdoor activity except emergency firewood retrieval. Retrieve only enough for 12 hours at a time. Do not stay outside longer than 5 minutes per trip. Emergency Protocol 2. If the radio loses all signal for more than 1 hour, assume you are in communication blackout. Continue following standard procedures. Do not leave the cabin to seek higher ground or better signal. Emergency Protocol 3. During a blackout, ration stored water to 1 gallon per day. Melt snow only as a last resort and only using water from within 10 feet of the cabin door. Do not collect snow from beyond that perimeter. Emergency Protocol 4. If you see tracks in fresh snow that circle the cabin, measure the distance from the cabin to the nearest track. If the distance is less than 15 feet, remain inside until the tracks are obscured by new snowfall or until dawn, whichever comes first. Emergency Protocol 5. Power failure during a storm is likely. If the generator fails and cannot be restarted, rely on the stove for heat and light. Do not burn more than 3 logs per hour. Conserve fuel. How long do storms usually last up here? I asked. 3 days, typically. This one might be longer. He checked his own list. You've got enough supplies for 2 weeks if you're careful. Enough firewood for 10 days, maybe 12. And if the storm lasts longer than that, it won't. He zipped his jacket. Follow the protocols. Don't improvise. I'll radio as long as the signal holds, but expect blackout periods. He left before sunset. The storm arrived on November 7th. It started with freezing rain that coated the trees in ice, then shifted to heavy snow around midnight. By 0200 hours, 6 inches had accumulated. By 0400 hours, the drifts against the north wall reached nearly a foot. The radio crackled with static. I managed one check-in with base at 0300 hours, but the signal was weak and broken. At 0415 hours, the generator died. I waited 15 minutes and tried the red switch. Nothing. Second attempt. Nothing. Third attempt. It turned over once and stopped. I added wood to the stove and closed the shutters. The cabin temperature dropped fast. I layered on every piece of clothing I'd brought and wrapped a blanket around my shoulders. The stove kept the interior tolerable, maybe 50 degrees. I rationed the wood carefully, 3 logs per hour as instructed. At 0700 hours, I looked outside. Snow covered everything. The trees were shapeless white columns. The clearing looked twice as large as I remembered. And there were tracks. They circled the cabin in a perfect loop, maybe 12 feet from the walls. The prints were large, widely spaced, and deep. Not deer, not elk. Something heavier. I measured the distance with my eyes, comparing it to the width of the porch. Definitely less than 15 feet. I closed the shutter and locked it. The snow continued all day. I stayed inside, feeding the stove, melting snow for water in a pot. The radio was dead, just static across all channels. At 2100 hours, I heard something walking on the roof. Not scratching, walking. The footsteps were deliberate, heavy enough to make the beams creak. They paced from one end of the cabin to the other, paused, and returned. I sat by the stove and didn't look up. The walking continued for an hour, then stopped. At 0100 hours, someone knocked on the door. 3 knocks, evenly spaced. I didn't move. The knocking repeated. 3 knocks. "Station 7, this is base. Open up, we need to evacuate you." The voice sounded like the supervisor. Same flat tone, same cadence. "Identify yourself with code and supervisor name," I said. "Code 417. Supervisor. I don't have that information right now. Just open the door." I stayed silent. "Daniel, open the door. The storm's getting worse. We need to get you out." "Radio base and get confirmation," I said. "Then I'll open the door." "The radio's down. That's why I'm here in person." I walked to the radio and turned the dial through all channels, static on every frequency. "If the radio's down, how did you know to come get me?" I asked. The voice on the other side of the door didn't answer. I waited 5 minutes. Then I heard footsteps moving away from the cabin, crunching through snow toward the north tree line. I logged it with numb fingers. The storm lasted 6 days. The generator never restarted. I burned through the firewood methodically, keeping the stove just warm enough to prevent frostbite. I melted snow and rationed food. The cabin stayed cold enough that I could see my breath even 3 feet from the stove. Every night the footsteps circled in the snow. Every night something walked on the roof. Twice more I heard knocking, and twice more a voice tried to convince me to open the door. I stopped answering. On the 4th day, I heard my sister again. "Danny, I'm freezing. Please let me in just for a few minutes." She sounded desperate, her voice cracking. I pressed my hands over my ears and recited the emergency protocols out loud until the voice stopped. On the 6th day, the snow stopped. The sky cleared to hard blue. The radio sputtered to life at 1400 hours. The supervisor's voice came through, faint but clear. "Base to Station 7, confirm you're receiving, over." I grabbed the handset. "Station 7 to base, receiving, over." "Good, status report, over." Generator failed on day 1, survived on wood heat, supplies adequate, no injuries, over. Copy. Stay inside today. I'll hike in tomorrow with a technician to check the generator. Over and out. I looked outside. The tracks were still there, a perfect circle 12 feet from the cabin. The snow had drifted and partially filled them, but the shape was clear. I took a photograph with my personal camera, even though I knew I'd never show it to anyone. The supervisor and a technician arrived the next afternoon. They replaced a fuel line on the generator and had it running in 40 minutes. The technician didn't speak to me once. The supervisor asked routine questions, checked the log, and confirmed the supply count. "You did well," he said. "A lot of people don't make it through their first storm. What happens to the ones who don't?" He looked at me for a long moment. "They leave. Or they break a rule and we find them in the spring." "Find them how?" "Different every time." He handed me a new printed sheet, updated winter guidelines. Follow them exactly. The new sheet had 8 additional rules. I read them after he left. Winter Addendum, effective November 15th. 1. Snowmelt may contain sediment or discoloration. This is normal. Boil all snowmelt for 3 minutes before drinking. 2. Ice dams may form on the roof. Do not attempt to remove them. They will melt on their own. 3. If you hear tapping on the windows, do not investigate. Close the shutters and wait for the sound to stop. 4. Tracks in the snow should be logged but not followed. Measure and photograph if possible, but do not attempt to identify the source. 5. Frozen condensation may form unusual patterns on window glass. Do not interpret these patterns or attempt to preserve them. 6. If the stove produces smoke that smells sweet or floral, open the south window immediately for ventilation and add no more wood for 1 hour. Use only wood from the covered east pile. 7. Extended isolation may cause auditory and visual distortions. If you see or hear something that contradicts physical laws, log it and continue normal procedures. Do not dwell on it. 8. Your contract runs through March 31st. Spring relief arrives April 1st at 0800 hours. Have all logs, inventories, and notes prepared for handoff. I pinned the sheet to the clipboard. Winter settled in. The temperature dropped below freezing and stayed there. I went through wood faster than I'd planned, and by late November, I had to start supplementing from the main supply pile. The covered east pile dwindled to a 3-day supply. On December 2nd, I ran out. I stood on the porch at 1400 hours, looking at the uncovered west pile. It was larger than the east pile had ever been, stacked neatly with at least a month's worth of dry wood. Rule 11 said to use only the covered east pile. I radioed base. Station 7 to base. Covered firewood depleted. Requesting guidance. Over. The supervisor's response was immediate. Copy. Do not use the west pile. Repeat. Do not use the west pile. Supply drop in 48 hours. Ration your current wood until then. Over. I have maybe 6 hours of wood left. Over. Then ration carefully, 2 logs per hour maximum. Base out. I burned 1 log per hour and let the cabin temperature drop to 40 degrees. I wore every layer I owned and slept in 15-minute intervals, waking to add another log. The supply drop arrived 36 hours later, cutting it closer than I wanted to admit. The ranger who delivered it said nothing, just verified the transfer and hiked back out. I restocked the covered pile and burned 3 logs immediately to bring the cabin back to survivable temperature. That night, I dreamed about the west pile. In the dream, I walked outside and selected a piece of wood. It looked normal, dry and gray, but when I brought it inside and placed it in the stove, it didn't burn. It melted, dripping black tar that smelled like burnt hair. I woke at 0300 hours, sweating despite the cold. The rest of December passed in a rhythm of cold, firewood, and radio checks. I saw the deer twice more, both times standing motionless and facing the cabin. I closed the shutters and waited. I heard footsteps in the snow almost every night. On December 18th, I found a note slipped under the door. I discovered it during my morning routine, after I'd banked the fire and was preparing to sleep. A single piece of paper folded once, sitting on the rough wooden floorboards just inside the threshold. The door was locked, both deadbolts engaged, the slide bar in place. I checked them at 0600 hours, same as every morning. It was written on the same kind of paper as the operational guidelines, that slightly off-white government stock with the watermark I could never quite make out. But the handwriting was different, slanted, hurried, the letters cramped together as if the writer had been trying to fit as much information as possible into a small space. I picked it up and unfolded it carefully. If you're reading this, you've lasted longer than most. Don't trust the time windows. They shift. Watch for changes in your perimeter count, even if they tell you not to walk it. The thing that circles isn't always the same thing. The west pile isn't wood. Don't let them tell you it's safe in the spring. It isn't. No signature, no date, no identifying marks of any kind. I turned the note over. The back was blank, showing only the texture of the paper and a slight discoloration along one edge where it had been folded. I read it again, more slowly this time, paying attention to each word. The handwriting showed stress. The letters got smaller and more compressed toward the end, and there were small ink blots where the pen had paused. Someone had written this quickly, maybe in poor light, possibly while scared. The phrasing was specific. Lasted longer than most suggested a high turnover rate, which contradicted what the supervisor had implied during my orientation. The time window shift directly contradicted the guidelines I'd been following for 3.5 months, and the west pile isn't wood. That was the detail that made my stomach tighten. I'd walked past that uncovered pile on the west side of the cabin dozens of times. It looked like wood. Split logs, weathered gray from exposure, stacked in a neat row against the cabin wall. I'd never touched it, never examined it closely because Rule 11 was explicit, use only wood from the covered east pile. But I'd never questioned what the west pile actually was. I walked to the window and looked out at the pale morning light filtering through the trees. The west pile was visible from this angle, a dark stack against the cabin's exterior. From here, it looked exactly like firewood. I sat down at the table and placed the note in front of me. My hands were shaking slightly, though I couldn't tell if it was from cold, fatigue, or something else. The logical explanation was that the prior occupant had left it, the one who'd written those final entries in the log back in August, who'd lasted through spring and summer before leaving 6 weeks before my arrival. They would have known the cabin layout, would have had access to the same paper stock, would have understood the rules well enough to warn about them. But why slip it under the door? Why not leave it with the rest of the documentation, clipped to the guidelines or tucked into the notebook? And how had it appeared this morning, 3.5 months after they'd left? I checked the door again. Both deadbolts were still engaged. The slide bar was in place. The door frame showed no signs of tampering, no gaps or splits in the wood. The hinges were solid. Someone or something had placed this note inside a locked cabin. I looked at my watch. 0730 hours. The supervisor would be available on the radio, but I'd miss my sleep window if I called now. I needed rest. I'd been awake for 13 hours straight, and tonight would be another full shift. But I also needed to report this. I made the decision and powered on the radio, turning the dial to channel 6. Station 7 to base. Priority communication, over. Static hissed for maybe 5 seconds. Then the supervisor's voice, alert despite the early hour. Base to Station 7, go ahead, over. Found an unauthorized note inside the cabin. Appears to have been placed under the door sometime between 0100 and 0600 hours this morning. Both deadbolts were engaged during that period, over. Describe the note, over. I read it verbatim, speaking slowly and clearly. The radio was silent while I read. When I finished, I waited. Static for 10 seconds. Then, disregard. Prior occupant left several notes before departure. Contradicts established protocols. Dispose of it. Over. Several notes. Plural. Which meant there might be others hidden somewhere in the cabin, or that the prior occupant had a history of leaving unauthorized warnings. Who was the prior occupant? Over. That's not relevant. Dispose of the note. Base out. The radio clicked off before I could ask anything else. I sat there looking at the note for a long time. The supervisor's response had been too quick, too dismissive. He hadn't asked where I found it, hadn't questioned how it appeared in a locked cabin, hadn't seemed concerned about the security breach. He'd just told me to throw it away. I thought about the prior occupant's final log entry. Follow them exactly. The count matters. The times matter. Don't convince yourself you know better. That had been official, part of the documented record. But this note, this was different. This was personal, passed directly from one ranger to the next, outside the official chain of information. I folded the note carefully and put it in my pocket, the inner one that buttoned closed. I didn't throw it away. The rest of December passed in a rhythm I'd grown familiar with. Short gray days and long dark nights. The perimeter count held steady between 107 and 109 steps. The battery voltage stayed in the acceptable range. I covered and uncovered the south window at precisely 2200 and 2230 hours every night, following the autumn addendum's adjusted timing. But I found myself thinking about the note constantly. Don't trust the time windows, they shift. I started paying closer attention to the clock during my window shade ritual. I'd been using my wristwatch, a basic digital model with a backlight. It kept time reliably, never gaining or losing more than a few seconds per week. But I started cross-referencing it against the old analog clock mounted on the cabin wall above the shelf. On December 21st, I noticed a discrepancy. My watch read 2200 hours exactly when I stood up to cover the south window. The wall clock read 2203, 3 minutes difference. I checked both timepieces carefully. My watch was running normally, the seconds ticking by at a steady pace. The wall clock's second hand moved smoothly around the face, not jumping or sticking. I covered the window at 2200 hours by my watch, which was 2203 by the wall clock. 30 minutes later, 2230 by my watch, 2233 by the wall clock. I removed the shade. Nothing happened. No anomalies, no sounds, no signs that I'd violated the timing. I logged the discrepancy in my notebook, but didn't radio base about it. The next night, the wall clock was 4 minutes ahead of my watch. The night after that, 5 minutes. On Christmas Eve, the difference was 7 minutes. I stood in the cabin at what my watch said was 21:55 hours, 5 minutes before I was supposed to cover the south window. The wall clock read 22:02, 2 minutes past the designated time. I had to make a choice. Follow my watch or follow the wall clock. I thought about the note. The time window shift. I walked to the radio and changed the channel to 9, the backup frequency. Then I tuned to channel 6 and listened. The supervisor's voice came through clearly, handling a routine check-in with what sounded like another station. I switched back to channel 9 and waited, watching both timepieces. At 2200 hours by my watch, 2207 by the wall clock, I covered the south window with the canvas shade, hooking all 6 fasteners in place. I sat down at the table and waited, my hand near the radio in case I needed to call for help. The minutes ticked by, 2210, 2215, 2220. At 2230 by my watch, I stood and removed the shade. The night remained quiet. I logged it. December 24. Time discrepancy continues. Wall clock now 7 minutes ahead of wristwatch. Followed wristwatch timing for window protocol. No anomalies observed. Christmas passed without acknowledgement. I ate a meal from my regular supplies and added wood to the fire. The radio brought a brief check-in from base at 1800 hours, the supervisor's voice as flat and professional as always. He didn't mention Christmas, neither did I. New Year's Eve was the same. The date changed in my log from December 31st to January 1st, but nothing else marked the transition. I marked the days in the log, but stopped feeling them. Time became a function of procedures rather than calendar dates. What mattered wasn't whether it was Wednesday or Saturday, wasn't whether it was the 15th or the 23rd. What mattered was the perimeter count, the battery voltage, the window timing, the radio codes. The wall clock continued to drift ahead of my watch. By January 5th, the difference was 11 minutes. On January 9th, the perimeter count became possible again. The storm that had buried the cabin in mid-November had left snowpack that took nearly 2 months to compact enough for walking. I'd been confined to the cabin or immediate porch area for 8 weeks, monitoring the exterior only through windows. The autumn addendum had suspended perimeter walks between October 20th and November 10th, but the snow had extended that suspension by another month. Now, finally, the surface was solid enough to support my weight without sinking. I waited until 21:30 hours. By my watch, the wall clock read 21:41 and stepped outside. The air was so cold it hurt to breathe. Each inhalation felt like inhaling broken glass. Each exhalation produced a cloud of vapor that hung in the still air for several seconds before dissipating. The temperature had to be well below zero, cold enough that the snow under my boots didn't crunch but squeaked, compressed into something harder than ice. I clicked on my flashlight and started walking clockwise around the cabin, counting each step. The beam of light swept across the snow-covered ground, illuminating a landscape transformed by winter. The clearing that had been brown grass and pine needles in September was now a smooth white expanse, broken only by the dark vertical lines of tree trunks at the perimeter. The cabin itself looked smaller somehow, dwarfed by the snow drifts that had built up against its walls. I counted carefully, keeping my pace steady. At 70 steps, my flashlight beam caught something that didn't belong. I stopped walking and redirected the light. A cairn. 3 stones stacked precisely, one on top of another, sitting on the snow surface. The stones were dark, each one roughly the size of my fist, and they showed no snow accumulation on their upper surfaces, despite the fact that it had snowed lightly just 2 days ago. I hadn't built it. I was certain of that. During the 8 weeks of heavy snow, I hadn't ventured more than 10 feet from the cabin door except for necessary trips to the latrine, and I'd counted every one of those trips carefully. Someone or something had placed these stones here. I noted the location mentally and continued my perimeter walk. At 90 steps, I found another cairn, identical configuration, 3 stones, fist-sized, dark against the white snow. No accumulation on the upper surfaces. At 108 steps, I returned to the porch. 2 cairns, evenly spaced around the cabin's perimeter. Both were outside the normal walking path by maybe 5 feet, positioned in what would be a larger circle around the structure. I went inside and locked both deadbolts, my hands stiff with cold despite my gloves. I logged it carefully. January 9. Perimeter count 108 steps. Found 2 stone cairns during walk, both outside normal perimeter. Each cairn consists of 3 stones, fist-sized, stacked vertically, located at approximately 70 and 90 steps clockwise from cabin door. Stones show no snow accumulation, origin unknown, did not approach or disturb cairns. I added a note. Unexplained stone markers on perimeter, not present before winter storm period. Recommend investigation during daylight hours. But I didn't radio base about it, not yet. I wanted to observe to see if the cairns changed or multiplied. The next night there were 3 cairns. I found them at 50, 90, and 130 steps around the cabin. Wait, 130 steps meant I'd walked past the door and continued counting. The perimeter was normally 106 to 110 steps total. 130 would be 20 to 24 steps past the starting point. I stopped and recounted, started over from the porch, walking slowly, measuring each step. 109 steps brought me back to the porch. The third cairn was located past the completion point of my normal perimeter walk, in an area I'd have to deliberately extend my route to observe. Whatever was building these cairns was creating a pattern that extended beyond my established patrol route. The night after that, 4 cairns, then 5, then 6. They formed a pattern, a secondary circle perhaps 15 feet outside the cabin. Each cairn was identical, 3 stones, each the size of a fist, stacked with no visible mortar or adhesive. The stones appeared to be granite or similar rock, dark gray with flecks of lighter minerals. They didn't match the local geology. The stones in the area were primarily basalt, darker and more uniform in color. On January 15th, I walked the perimeter at 21:30 hours and found 6 cairns arranged in a perfect circle around the cabin. At 0200 hours, I heard something moving between the cairns. I was sitting at the table logging the night's observations when the sound started. Footsteps, but different from the circling steps I'd grown accustomed to. These were slower, more deliberate, and they moved in a specific pattern. They would pace from one cairn to another, pause for 10 to 15 seconds, then move to the next cairn. The sound continued for 43 minutes by my watch. I didn't look outside. I kept my eyes on the notebook, on my hands, on the stove. Rule 7 was explicit. Between 2300 and 0400 hours, do not look directly at the north tree line. I'd expanded that prohibition in my own mind to include not looking outside at all during those hours unless absolutely necessary. When the sound finally stopped, it cut off abruptly mid-step. One moment there were footsteps crunching through snow, the next moment absolute silence. I waited another hour before completing my log entry and attempting to sleep. On January 20th, the supervisor hiked in with supplies and a final addendum. I heard him coming from a quarter-mile away, his boots crunching through the frozen snowpack. I stepped onto the porch and watched him approach through the gray afternoon light. He carried a large frame pack and moved with the steady, economical gait of someone who'd walked this trail hundreds of times. "Daniel," he said, dropping the pack on the porch, "you're looking thin." "Rations have been adequate," I said. "That's not what I meant." He studied my face for a moment. "You're sleeping during daylight hours?" "Yes, following protocol." "Good." He opened the pack and started unloading supplies. Canned goods, batteries, propane canisters, coffee, rice, dried beans. I helped him carry everything inside and checked the inventory against his list. Everything matched exactly. When we'd finished, he pulled a folded paper from his jacket pocket. "Late winter protocols. You're almost done. 8 weeks left." I took the paper and unfolded it. The new sheet was shorter than the previous amendments. 4 rules, typed in the same format as all the others. Late winter protocols, effective January 20th. I read through them quickly. 1. Daylight hours are increasing. Adjust sleep schedule gradually. You must be awake for full darkness, but you may sleep during extended dawn and dusk. 2. Melting snow may reveal debris or items around the cabin. Do not collect or move these items. Log their location and description. 3. Animal activity will increase in late February and March. Expect elk, deer, and smaller mammals near the cabin. Follow existing rules regarding unusual animal behavior. 4. Your relief will arrive April 1st at 0800 hours. Begin organizing all documentation on March 25th. Include all logs, amendments, and notes. Do not leave gaps in the record. I read them again more carefully. Rule 2 stood out. Melting snow may reveal debris or items around the cabin. "What kind of items?" I asked. The supervisor was checking the generator, making notes on a small pad. "Equipment, personal effects, things people left behind. From prior rangers? Some of them." He closed his notebook. "Don't touch anything you find. Just log it. We'll collect everything during the transition." "What about the cairns?" He looked up sharply. "What cairns?" "Stone markers, 3 rocks stacked. They started appearing around the cabin perimeter in early January. There are currently 6 of them arranged in a circle about 15 feet from the cabin walls. The supervisor walked to the south window and looked out. From this angle, 2 of the cairns were visible, dark interruptions in the white landscape. "Log them," he said after a moment. "Don't approach them. Don't move them." They weren't mentioned in any of the protocols. They are now. Consider it an addendum to the addendum. He turned away from the window. "How's your water supply?" The abrupt change of subject was clearly intentional. I let it go. "Adequate. I've been melting snow according to the emergency protocols." "Good. The well pump might freeze in February. Stay ahead of your water needs." He shouldered his empty pack. "You've followed all the protocols?" "Yes. The window timing, even with the time discrepancy, I felt my pulse quicken." "You know about that? The wall clock runs fast, always has. Use your watch." He walked to the door. "Follow the protocols. You've made it this far." He left before I could ask how he knew about the clock, before I could ask what the cairns were, before I could ask about the note I'd found under the door. I stood on the porch and watched him disappear into the trees, his footprints a clear trail in the snow. Then I went inside and added the new protocols to my clipboard.